Let me just do my little map of the holy world here. See, if you don't remember anything else, you'll always remember 2 oblongs and a stick make the whole Holy Land, okay? All right. Anyway, this is what we call in the 5th grade science the Fertile Crescent. Over here is the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. This was Babylon right here. A, B, A. And halfway between these 2 points, this is Israel, of course, over here. E-L. Halfway between this 2 point is a little town called Nineveh. And Nineveh was the capital city of the Assyrian Empire at the time, okay? And that's A-S-S-R. Y-R. Okay, the Assyrian Empire, which pretty much embodied most of this. Now, not to get my lines all screwed up, but they were at their zenith, their apex, if you will, during this time frame. The time frame is probably around 840 to 830 BC. That's what the time frame was when the Assyrians were the most powerful army in the world. In fact, nobody could stand against them. Just sheer numbers alone, they had an army of about 200,000 soldiers. And in that day and age, that was a bunch of guys. Nobody had a standing army that big. All right, Nineveh was their capital. Now, over here sits a little guy named Jonah. And God tells him to go to Nineveh, the biggest army in the world, the most bloodthirsty, the most ruthless people in the world, and tell them to clean up their act. Good idea? Not to Jonah. Jonah comes over here, which is in that day Phoenicia, and he gets on a boat and he starts sailing away. And the Lord says, you know, that's not what I asked you to do. They were going that way. So God whips up a storm. And of course the men, well, we'll read chapter 1 and you'll understand it. Sailors in these days, were probably some of the toughest men in the world, the Phoenicians. They were the sailors. They owned the trade routes on the Mediterranean Sea. What I'm trying to say is they weren't necessarily the bravest, nastiest, meanest fighters in the world, you know, hand-to-hand combat, but they were unafraid of anything ocean-wise. They would sail anywhere, through any storm, through anything, just to make a buck. And so the Phoenician sailors were feared amongst the waves. Even the Romans, when they finally came and started taking everything over, they were concerned about the navies of Phoenicia because these guys were known to be the best on the water. That's why Caesar built an incredible navy at Rome. Didn't have anybody that could sail it, but he built the ships anyway, thousands of them. And eventually he would destroy Phoenicia and take it over. And that would make Rome the greatest marketeers, or whatever you want to call them. All right, let's look at the first chapter. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah. He was the son of Amittai, and said to him, "Arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." Well, that's pretty much what Nineveh was. It was a city of the meanest, nastiest, most bloodthirsty, cruel, murderous gang of people you ever had on the earth. But instead, Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish, which was over here in modern Turkey. So he's going to run away. from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, that was the ancient Phoenician port, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish out of the presence of the Lord. Now the Lord hurled a great wind, see my little tornado there, on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break apart. And the sailors became afraid. And this is really kind of crucial, because the Phoenicians didn't ever fear anything in the ocean. They just didn't. Even it was a bad storm is what I think God's trying to tell us. The sailors themselves became afraid. And they became afraid, and every one of them cried out to his God, and they began to throw cargo which was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down below into the hold of the ship, and he laid down and had fallen sound asleep. So the captain approached him and said, "How is it that you are able to sleep? Get up and call upon your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us, such that we should not perish." And each man said to his mate, "Come, let us cast lots, so that we may learn on whose account this calamity has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell to Jonah. And they said to him, "Tell us now, on whose account has this calamity struck us? What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and from what people are you?" And he answered them and said, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men became extremely frightened, and they said to him, "How could you have done this?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the very presence of the Lord, because that's what he told them. So they said to him, "What should we do that the sea may become calm for us?" For the sea was becoming increasingly more stormy. And he said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, then the sea will become calm for you. For I know that on account of me this great storm has come to us." However, the men rowed desperately to try and return to land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stronger against them. And they called out to the Lord and said, "We earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not put innocent blood upon us, for thou, O Lord, hast done as thou hast pleased." So they together picked up Jonah and threw him in the sea, and immediately the sea stopped its raging, and all the men feared the Lord greatly. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made promises to him. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the stomach of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights. The title of that story is A Weekend in a Whale. You know, this is probably one of the hardest stories in all the Bible to believe. And yet, you know, they all make excuses. Well, was it a whale? Was it a shark? Was it a sunfish? Sunfish in the Mediterranean are huge. Problem, though, they have little bitty mouths. So doubtful a sunfish could swallow a human being, if Jonah was even of average height, you know. What was it? Well, we don't know until about 3 months ago. I saw a video, awesome video. The video was of 2 guys on those silly little paddle boards, you know, the big board they stand on, and they got a stick, and they do this. How smart is that? Oh, it's fun. Get a canoe, pal, if you want to paddle something. At least you can sit down on a canoe. Anyway, they're on their little stick, with their stick, paddling away. And all of a sudden, both of them were swallowed by a humpback whale. And they caught this on film, on video. And the whale just came up out of nowhere. They're paddling on. They had no idea. And then, haul. And they were gone just like that. And they're all screaming on the boat and hollering on the boat, and people are crying on the boat and praying on the boat and everything on the boat, just like these guys were. And then a couple of minutes went by, and then the whale came back up. Whoa! It sucked in a lot of water because it got something stuck in his throat. Probably these stupid paddle boards and a stick. And out they came. Other than the fact they wet themselves, I'm sure, they were uninjured. And it was caught on film. It was all over the internet and news and everything. Any of you guys see it? Did you see it? Absolutely incredible. So to all those who would say, oh, a whale couldn't swallow a man, easily, evidently swallowed 2 of them and their stupid little boards. So here you go. Get a canoe, stay in the rivers, and let the alligators eat you. Don't mess with the whales. Unless you get a really much bigger stick. That way, maybe they couldn't swallow it. What do you think about this? What's the one thing God demands more than anything else in the Bible? Huh? Obedience. Obedience is the second greatest thing in the world, but you're right. First greatest thing God demands, and even Jesus, was faithfulness. Faith. What is faith? Well, it's a belief in something strong enough that you will alter your behavior around it, is it not? And you would do anything and everything in your behavior to enhance that which you believe in. Faith starts with knowing who you are, who God is, but faith ends, or matures, if you will, in living, acting, behaving. So if God says, Sandy, I need you to go to Walmart for me. And you say, no, Lord, I don't want to dress like those people. But he says, I want you to go anyway. And you go, well, Target is just as good. I'll go there. What have you just done? Well, you've just said that God doesn't know what he's doing, first of all. Kind of like Habakkuk. It didn't end well for him either. You've just said that God doesn't know what he's doing, that your way or your brain is better than his way, and that you would rather act as unto yourself, self-preservation, rather than risk a sacrifice for the Lord. And Jesus said, you do things your way, it's going to end badly. When you do things my way, you will find a great blessing, right? Well, then you better go to Walmart. But trust me, you can go in just your undies and it's okay there, because most of the people are dressed like that. Oh, Lord. Anyway, obedience is a good answer, but I'm going to put that second priority in the Bible, because obedience is how we develop, and mature faith, which without, we can do nothing with God. Nothing. Period. So what we have here is both a faith problem, in the sense that, where did Jonah go? Uh-oh. I'm fighting a tempest over here. There he is. What we have here is a couple of problems. It is not just I don't want to do it sort of thing. I mean, if I were in that place, I would probably at least try and enter into discussion with God, saying, Lord, do you know who these people are? Well, that's a bad idea, because that's what Habakkuk did. And again, it didn't end well for him either. God knows who they are. God knows who you are. So what's the problem here? Everybody knew who the Assyrians were. So the problem must be in Jonah. What was the problem with Jonah? Well, more than that, he didn't know who he was. Well, I'm a Jew, I'm from Israel, I got this great God. This is him talking to the sailors. The God who made all the sky and the earth and the water and the sea. He made everything. In fact, nothing that exists outside of him. Well, if somebody knew that, and the Lord asked that somebody to do something rather extraordinary, what should that somebody, how should that somebody interpret that?
That was for the best.
What's that?
But that was for the best.
Well, say it better. Jesus said it a bunch. Well, no, I don't want to be that kind of tyrannical God. But Jesus said it best. If I am with you, finish that sentence. Who or what can stand against you?
He had a little faith problem.
He had a little faith problem right on the nose. This wasn't an obedient problem. It was a faith problem. His faith is not developed. It had not matured to where it should have been. At least God considered this and said, Jonah, I want you to do something for me. I want you to go preach to these guys saying they're way out of hand. They need to back it down some. I know what's going on in Jonah's mind, but the irony here is that Jonah knows the enemy better than he knows his God. Think about that just for a moment. And how many times do we do that in our lives? All the time. How many times do we acknowledge the Lord on a daily basis in our life and to build and substantiate our own faith? If I ever get the first parking space in Walmart, I jump out and praise the Lord for it, because that never happens. Now that may sound flip to you, but I thank God for a lot of stuff like that every day. Something simple will happen. In fact, I was told this morning of an event. And it was just another little road sign on this Pilgrim's Life to say, I'm the Lord, I'm with you, carry on. And we need those along our way. We need those to say, okay, God, I'm not sure what to do here. Boom, go that way. Okay. Or we can go sailing. Jonah didn't have an obedience problem. He had a faith problem. I mean, quite frankly, nobody ever looks at this prophet this way. And it makes me wonder why God chose him in the first place. But the minute I ask that question, God, why did you choose somebody that didn't have faith in you? He knew about God. We all know about God. Yes, anybody on the planet. They say, oh yeah, I know God. When was the last time you worshiped your God? Well, I'm Catholic. I don't have to go to church. I'm being flip. I just spent 2.5 weeks in 5 different countries that is 100% Catholic. And I didn't see anybody in church but me taking pictures. The only time I saw real religion happening in the lives of individuals was at an abbey I went to. There's 40 monks in there. And wow, those guys are men that are powerful in God. And they also make really good wine. So I'm not sure how much was wine, how much was God, but there was a lot of power going on in there. Everybody else, huge edifices laid with gold everywhere. I even put that in my picture. I said, everything that looks gold really is gold. The only people in those churches are security guards with machine guns. And make sure the bad guys don't run off with the gold. But as for people praying and hoping and dreaming and crying and suffering, they must be doing it somewhere else, because I didn't see a lot of them. Jonah knew more about his enemy than he knew about his God. Again, go back to Jesus. If I am with you, who or what can stand against you? The storm came. Jonah said, yeah, it's probably me, because I'm a Hebrew. I'm a child of the Lord God who made everything. Even the sailors got scared, fell to their knees, and begged God's mercy. And without getting God's mercy, he said, if we can't have your mercy, Lord, at least don't hold this man's blood accountable to us. We don't want to throw him overboard, but if that's what you're demanding, over he went. And of course, whoa, another paddleboarder. And immediately the sea stopped its raging. Well, I think the soldiers, or the sailors, had a bigger, better, and more mature faith than Jonah did. Question to you, why would God choose Jonah? Think for a minute. Compare it to something you're well aware of. You know where I'm going with that? Why in the world would God choose Chanter to be a minister? I never wanted to be a minister. I didn't plan to set out to be a minister. I didn't go to holy school to be a minister. I went to the University of Florida to be an advertising agent, to sell you deodorant. Not that I've ever looked under your arm, but I bet it's a little stinky under there. And you need my secret. I have a secret. That was one of my accounts. I have a secret, and I will tell everybody about your underarms if you don't buy it. I went to another advertising agency where I know how to pick up women. Because I know that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So you can't have dandruff falling out of your hair, especially if you're wearing black. I wrote that. Jim Kelly and I did. What am I talking about? Head and shoulders. 45 years they've used that. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. This is what I was good at. Tony the Tiger. Great! Who animated that nonsense? I wrote advertising. The Silver Bullet. What is that? Coors Light. She knows that. She's a sinner. I like her a lot. I like her a lot. You're what?
I'm from Texas.
Oh, she's from Texas. Favorite line in that movie, The Rookie or whatever it was, is when he gets his chance to go be a major leaguer and he's got 3 babies at home and he says to his wife, "No, I won't go. I'm too old." And she goes, "Mister, I am a Texas woman. My life will continue to run fine and beautiful with or without you. You get on that bus and go play baseball." That was my favorite line right now. I am a Texas woman. You see this standing up over here? I don't need you. Where am I going with all of this? The point was, Chanter was the last person I would have chosen to be a minister. And yet here I am, 45 years later, trying to talk to you about a guy on a boat. Something about a boat. Why would God choose Jonah? He's a man who knew God, but certainly didn't act on behalf, or his actions spoke louder than his words. If Benny asked me to do something and I didn't want to do it, I'd say, well, I'm just going to disobey Benny if she don't like it. That's tough. But if God asks you to do something, and you said, well, I don't like it, and if God doesn't like it, that's tough. Now you put yourself in the big leagues. Let me tell you something, Mr. or Mrs. You're going to Walmart. Even if I have to have a fish swallow you for 3 days. Well, that's a bit extreme, don't you think? Couldn't God just have a fish push him up to the shore or something? Think about it. I know God, He made everything, blah, blah, blah. He asked me to go to the worst people in the whole world, but instead I'm out of here and God can find somebody else. You just put yourself in the big leagues. So the Lord says, well, let me show you what I can do. Even to where the soldiers were praying and begging for God's mercy. Not Jonah. The sailors, I keep saying soldiers, but I mean sailors. The sailors were begging for God's mercy and begging God to forgive them and begging God not to hold His blood against them. Heaved them over and a fish swallows them. Immediately the storm stops and every guy on that boat said, whoa, what just happened? Jonathan Edwards became a world famous preacher for one sermon. Do you remember what the name of that sermon was? He got so aggravated with his church once for not moving and believing and trusting in God. He just said, "That's it! Every one of you in my church!" He's screaming at them. Pounding, pounding. This is back in the 1700s. "Every one of you are going to go to hell, and I'm going to plod all the way. Unless you turn your faith around. You know God, you believe in God, but you don't act on behalf of God. You are a lousy witness." He's pounding the pulpit. And he says, "I am not going to persecute you. I am not going to judge you. I am not going to, condemn you to hell. But you know what I am going to do? I'm going to leave you." And he had a little string with a bug on the end of it, struggling. He says, "I'm going to leave you in the hands of an angry God." Boom. And he dropped that thing down, and he dropped it on the floor and said, "That's where I'm leaving you." People ran out of the church. Everybody was running for, a lot of them looking for boats. "I'm going to leave you in the hands of an angry God." That was Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon. If you all Google it, go online, find it, read it, and you're going to go, ooh. You probably never come back to church either. Jonah didn't have a hearing problem. He didn't have an obedience problem. He had a faith problem. Jesus said, "If I'm with you, who or what can stand against you?" Paul said it the same way. He said, "You know what? Romans have got him, beat him up and everything. You can only kill me once. But God can kill me for eternity. Which way am I going to go on that? You do what you want to do to me, but you can only do it once." He wrote later that it is given to every man to die but one time. After that, he's got an appointment with whom? The Lord God. Which, he goes on to write, he will keep. No boats to escape on, no chariots to take you away, no fast horses. You get to stand there, God gets to stand here, and you are now in the hands of either an angry or a merciful God, depending on what you did before you got there. Paul says, "I'm going to go to the hands of a merciful God. I don't care what you do to me. Who or what can stand against you? It has been given to every man to die but one time." And Jesus said, "Even though you die," finish that sentence, "yet shall you live. And that life is forever." Think about that. Jonah didn't have an obedience problem. He had a faith problem. He knew of God. But just like many of our Christians today, it stopped before he got to the second half. He knew of God, but he never actually believed enough to live for God. James said, "Faith without works is no faith at all. It's dead, bury it." Jesus said, "Live, live, live." Last question. Why would God choose Jonah? Why would God choose Chanter? I've told some of you the story about my mother. She's a real pain in the butt. She used to always say, "Tommy, one of these days you're going to do something great for God." And I'd say, "Please stop. One of these days, Tommy, you're going to do something." She's the only one allowed to call me Tommy, by the way. "One of these days you're going to do something great for God." She said that every day of my life for all the days of her life. She wanted me to be a Catholic priest. I sadly I disappointed her because of you, women. I love them at the time a little bit more than anything else. So, being that I got married and I had a wife, and we, became one in God's sight and went forth and multiplied, that kind of canceled the Catholic Church for me. So I was off the hook. And when my mom said, one of these days, you're going to do something for God. Not really. Can't be a priest, Mom. Oh, yeah. Real little did I realize the thing that I married was the very thing that was going to drag me into the church again, into the Bible again, and eventually God shows up and says, Tom, I got a job for you. I want you to go to Asbury and become a minister. I didn't want to go to Asbury. I don't even know what Asbury is. I learned that later in the religion stuff. Tom Chanter was not really living for the Lord when he was at the University of Florida. He was living for Saturday, the football game, the celebrations, and a certain blonde that would destroy my life in just a few short years after that. I'm being flipped. But I'm going to tell you right here as I stand before the Lord and all of you, I never set out to be a minister. I went to that Asbury and figured out what it was. I was chosen of 800 and whatever students at Asbury to be part of a 12-man group that would study for years under 3 of the best biblical scholars in the world. And I was a freshman. Nobody gets to do that as a freshman. I had 800 real close friends after that in that seminary. Every one of which wanted to throw me overboard. But I studied with those guys, and then later when I did my doctorate, those 3 guys had transferred to Trinity, and I got to study with them 7 years more. But it was just a coincidence. Nothing ever really came of it. And then the next 45 years, I've been teaching you people about a man and his boat. Why did God choose Jonah? Answer that question.
Showing faith.
What is it?
To show them faith.
That's not a bad answer at all. And by that you mean what?
To believe in them.
Say it better. Did what?
To trust.
To trust.
To believe in His plan.
Every time you overcome an obstacle, what happens to you? You don't fear that obstacle anymore, do you? Every time you overcome a headache, a heartache, a bad situation, a circumstance, what happens to you? Then he said it not only takes your fear away, but it renews it with trust in that which helped you get past that circumstance, right? See, faith isn't a spectator sport. You got to play the game. You got to carry the ball. You got to get hit by the big, ugly, fat guys on the other side of the line. Faith in God and Jesus Christ, and however flowery you want to put it, is no picnic. Jesus said they hated me, they're going to hate you. What would the Assyrians' reaction be if a weenie little Jew walked in and said, oh, my God's going to clobber you guys? Let me borrow your knife. Thanks. Oh, by the way, it's over there.
So the Lord was willing to go out who He was, if not.
Well, this song ain't over yet. This is just Jonah's beginning.
Yeah, so that's the beginning.
He
was?
Well, he doesn't know who he was. He knew of a God that he's supposed to believe in, a God that chose his own people. You know, being a Jew is not a cultural thing or a genetic thing. What is being a Jew?
Someone that was born in a specific...
Well, no. Jewism, if you want to call it that, is just a selection by God of a group of people that said, you guys are going to be Jews from now on. Nobody knows that better on this planet than the Catholics. You go to church, well, I'm a Catholic. Wow. It's kind of a learned and selected thing. I mean, if you were part of the Jewish society and you didn't want to be a Jew anymore, and you left the Jewish society to go into the regular world and didn't tell anybody you were a Jew, would it affect your life at all? Probably not. Something that you chose once and now you don't choose it anymore. I once was an advertiser. You know what I had to do? I had to learn about advertising and what made good advertising. I had to practice advertising. I had to work in advertising to become an advertiser. And you know what I learned? That I didn't want to be an advertiser anymore. Sometimes you get into something and you say, boy, this really isn't what I expected. It's not what I want to do. And maybe Jonah was in that pot. I'm a Jew, I know a God, I know all the rituals and all that stuff. I just don't want to do it anymore. The problem is, Judaism may be a selective group, but what were Jonah's words to the sailors? Who is your God, and did you aggravate him? And he said, yeah. Well, who is your God? How do you answer? Creator of heaven and earth, the seas, and all that are in them. See, if you want to walk away from Israel and just say, I don't want to be a Jew anymore, that's fine. Leave the culture behind. In fact, we call this nation the melting pot. We got Italians, we got Jews, we got, Hungarians. We got Ratchas. We got a little bit of everything. And if there's any culture, they bring it with them. And then we are either blessed by it or not. A lot of people will say, well, I don't like Italian food. I don't like cucaracha food. And I don't like Hungarian food. Again, that's a selection, a choice thing. Excuse me. But if you say, I don't like God, excuse me again. The question is, what are you going to do about that? Where are you going to go that you don't have to put up with God? It's 139 time, isn't it? Psalm 139. Lord, if I dive down to the depths of hell, are you not there? If I stream in glory to the heights of heaven, are you not there? If I take to earth and put upon myself wings and fly to the remotest distance, even there does not your right hand hold me and your left hand guide me? You say something about God, I don't want to be God, I don't want to do God, I don't want anything God. You've put yourself into the big leagues now. I hope you can fight real well, because you're going to need it. What Jonah knew and what Jonah did was two different things. Jonah believed and had faith more in his enemy than he did in his Lord. Why did God choose Jonah? If you took a poll of 100 of my friends, if I have that many, problem is I don't like people. I'm a minister, but I don't like people. Is that weird? I'm cheesy. If you took a poll of 100 of my friends and asked each one of them one question, what would you put Chanter in as an occupation? I'll bet none of them would say minister. Why? Because I didn't act like a minister? Because I didn't talk like a minister? I didn't believe in ministry? I didn't talk about God up until the time when God said, Chanter, come here. And I, just like Jonah and all those sailors, I wet myself. Said, I want you to be a minister. And I said, I don't think I can do that. You sure you got the right guy? A lengthy discussion followed that, one of which I'm not proud of. One of which I wish I never said. And I said, okay. I don't know the Bible, I've never read it. And I don't know what an Asbury is. I can't even spell the word seminary. But if you say so, I'll do it. Oh, and by the way, I'm a Catholic. That didn't help at all. I figured I'd pull the old Virgin Mary thing. You know, be it done to your servant according to your will. The only problem is I didn't know who Virgin Mary was at that time. But when I finally got around to reading and studying her story, I realized, dang, I should have said that. I was looking for a boat. I just didn't find one. And then a guy came and said, I had a dream and a vision and I'm supposed to meet you. I said, really? I thought this guy was making this stuff up. He said, no, I'm going to Asbury, a seminary, next week for a concert. He was a musician. I'm going to play in the band at Asbury. You want to go with me? That's when I knew that the whole universe could screw with Chanter at any time. I said, all right, I'll go. And I went to Asbury with this musician, and he went to a kind of like a Christian Woodstock, if you got my drift there. And it was called Ichthus. That's the first letter of the Greek name of Christ, the fish. Ichthus means the fish. And he was getting ready. He was going out to the field. They had it in a field, big giant field, thousands and thousands of people. And I was getting ready to go with him. I said, can I hang out back on the stage and watch you guys? He says, yeah, sure, no problem. Unless you got something better to do. I don't even know what state I'm in. It's in Kentucky, by the way. And then a man walked up to me and said, would you like to see the library? I said, I don't want to see the library. I think you should see the library. I said, who are you? And he says, well, I'm a professor here at the Asbury Seminary, and somebody told me you were supposed to be here and look at this school. This guy's name was Bob Lyon, by the way. I would have his class later. And I introduced myself, well, I'm Tom, but I don't know about libraries or nothing like that. And he goes, he introduced himself, I'm Bob. I said, okay. Well, Bob took me into the library, and in the library there was a lady there who had all the tests you had to take, psychological tests, theological tests. I did real well on that. All the other tests you had to take, about 5 things of them. It takes about 4.5 hours. I never got to hang around backstage. They made me sit down there and take all these tests. Nobody told me I was supposed to take all these tests, so I took them all. And you know, I answered the questions as best as I could, having not known anything of what I know now. So my answers probably were not very good. And I'm going to share one more thing and then we're done. I went home and my musician friend said, well, how'd it go? I said, well, I took 5 tests for 4 hours, and if I got one answer right, God will have worked a miracle. I didn't know anything they were asking. So chances are pretty good Asbury will never happen. I didn't get home before there was an acceptance letter from Asbury in our mailbox. Carol and I had rented a little house for $100 a month, if you can believe that, up in Umatilla. Y'all know where that is? Well, that's sad that you know where that is, because there's nothing there except a feed and grain store. And I pulled it out, and Carol opened it and says, "You've been accepted to Asbury. In fact, they want you to come right now." So we packed up everything we had, my wooden couch that I made and her pillows that she made, threw it in a yeehaw, that's King James Version, and we took our yeehaw all the way to Asbury. I had to be in Greek class at 4 o'clock or whatever that day, 4 to 8 for Greek. So we parked the car out in front of the seminary, and I went into class. Carol sat in the car for 4.5 hours. I came out, when I was done with Greek class, I had Hebrew starting the next day, and said, "Oh, this man says he's got a house we can rent down here for $100 a month." I said, "Really?" Old burnt-out bank building, but he built 3 apartments on the upstairs. The downstairs are still all burnt out and everything. But the upstairs, he made 3 nice little apartments. He was also a professor at Asbury. So we rented his house right on the front of the road next to the railroad track. And we learned how to live with trains. I love trains. Not at 3:30 in the morning, but I love trains. And I thought to myself, now God, you're just messing with me, aren't you? Went to seminary the next day to get a schedule. I met another man named John Oswald, who was one of the 3 brilliant professors. And we talked for about an hour. And John Oswald looked at me and said, "Mr. Chanter, you don't know a thing, do you?" I said, "I'm a Catholic." Y'all wonder why I play with that all the time. Well, John Oswald looked at me and he says, "Now I know you don't know anything." So he introduced me to Bob Traina, who was the second of the 3 men. Bob Traina was the expert in the New Testament and Greek. And David Livingston was the third of those 3 men. He was an expert in culture, history, antiquities, archaeology. He was an archaeologist. Everything surrounding the Bible. John Oswalt, of course, whose famous work, the Israel, the House of Israel, he was the Old Testament specialist. He knew the Torah, up, down, sideways, diagonal, expert in Hebrew. I looked at those 3 men and I thought, God, why did you choose Chanter to be a minister? I didn't know nothing. I ain't done nothing. That was 45 years ago.
Oh, nice.
Why did God choose Jonah? Well, let's see what we can do. Why did Jesus choose Mary Magdalene? And she was a bit of a loose cannon. Who watched Jesus die? Mary Magdalene. We'll pick up chapter 2 next week. Right now, Jonah doesn't have an obedience problem. He's got a faith problem. We'll see what God does with him next week. All right?